The champagne was tepid, the laughter rehearsed. My cousin Emery's engagement brunch felt more like a stockholder meet and greet than a family celebration. Linen-draped tables glittered under the rented chandeliers at the Elmsford Country Club, a venue my father had helped finance. Brant Linwood, real estate mogul patriarch and master of the backhanded compliment, raised his glass to toast the future of the Linwood legacy. He looked right past me as he spoke, as if his lineage had skipped a generation and I'd merely drifted into this brunch by accident. "My sons?" he said. Pausing just long enough to let the phrase land, have always understood the weight of the Linwood name. Reese smirked. Callum nodded like he'd just closed a billion-dollar deal instead of mismanaging a development project in Tampa. Even Emery, freshly engaged and thoroughly mediocre, basked in praise he hadn't earned. I reached for the water pitcher, eyes fixed on the tablecloth pattern, when Aunt Zelda leaned in. "Still answering phones, dear," she murmured. Her voice oozed concern, the kind that cut deep while pretending to be soft. "I suppose someone has to keep things organized." I smiled. Not the real kind. Not the kind I use in San Francisco boardrooms or investor meetings. The practiced family function smile. Thin. Forgettable. "Something like that," I said. What I didn't say that just 3 days ago I'd finalized negotiations for a $70 million acquisition dovetails forth this quarter. Or that I now controlled 3 holding companies, one of which was quietly circling the drowning remains of Linwood Holdings. But no, this brunch wasn't for exposure. It wasn't time. Not yet. As the speeches dragged on, I watched them, the people who built their lives on assumptions. They saw a quiet woman in a navy dress. The assistant. The afterthought. And I let them see exactly that. When the dessert arrived, a server placed a small card in front of my father, prompting him to sign the club's event invoice. I watched as his hand shook slightly. One day soon, I thought that same hand would need my signature to survive. And when that day came, I intended to be ready. I was 16 and still believed logic could outweigh legacy. That numbers on a page could speak louder than names etched on office doors. My father had been pacing the kitchen that week, muttering about budget overruns and stalled zoning approvals. I listened from the staircase, notebook in hand. For 3 days, I built a strategy, cost reductions, new partnerships, a refreshed branding angle for Linwood Holdings. I printed graphs, color-coded projections, and practiced my delivery in the mirror until I could say, EBITDA, without flinching. That Friday night, I brought a blue folder to the dinner table. It was just the 6 of us, my parents, my 3 brothers, and me. My mother lit the candles like always, and my father uncorked a Cabernet older than I was. I waited until after the main course, when the room had settled into its usual rhythm of deal talk and shallow praise. Then I cleared my throat. "I've been thinking about the firm's East Side portfolio," I said. Every fork froze midair. I noticed the occupancy rates are down 18%, but the marketing budget hasn't shifted in 2 years. If we adjusted the outreach and restructured the contractor agreements. My brothers started grinning before I even reached the second page. Reese elbowed Callum. Emery rolled his eyes like I'd announced I wanted to become a magician. My father didn't interrupt. He waited until I'd finished the entire presentation, 11 pages, before folding his hands. "That's creative," he said. "But business is more complex than you understand." Callum added, "You should run for school treasurer. Cut your teeth there." Reese leaned back. "Dad's not looking for a secretary with opinions." Even my mother, eyes soft, said, "Sweetheart, it's lovely. But you might be better suited for PR. Maybe event planning." Then Aunt Zelda, who'd been visiting that weekend, laughed. "A pretty girl with big ideas. That's dangerous." They laughed again, all of them. I gathered my papers and excused myself. Upstairs, I sat on the floor of my bedroom with the folder across my knees. I didn't cry. I wrote, "One day I'll build something so solid they'll need it to stand." And from that night on, I stopped trying to be invited. By the time I filled out my college applications, I already knew the script they wanted from me. So I handed it to them. I declared communications as my major, smiled when my mother sighed with relief, nodded when my father said smart. Easy to pivot into marketing or HR. But the moment I received my student ID, I walked straight to the registrar and added a double major: business strategy and computational systems. At night, I coded in library corners while others drank on frat row. I studied market inefficiencies the way my brothers studied golf scores. By sophomore year, I had my first internship listed under a variation of my name, S.L. Wren. Just enough distance to keep eyes from connecting dots. They thought I was filing reports and answering phones for a local arts nonprofit. In reality, I was mapping vendor breakdown patterns for a regional logistics firm using predictive modeling. I did still make copies, but I also rewrote parts of their back-end system when no one was watching. My parents visited once unannounced. I hid the second laptop and the thick black binder full of prototype sketches. They stayed one night. My mother left a scarf behind. My father left a brochure for a hospitality management program. Think about transfer options, he'd said. Something with clearer career paths. After graduation, I accepted an executive assistant position in a mid-sized development company. They barely disguised their disappointment. At least it's stable, my father said. A stepping stone. He had no idea I'd chosen it for access to real-time construction data and regulatory archives. No idea that I'd already incorporated Dovetail Systems under the name of a dormant LLC I bought for $12,999. No idea that S.L. Wren was already filing patents. I played the role well, learned how to schedule meetings and disappear from them, how to take notes and not be noticed. Invisibility became second nature. They all thought I was just warming a seat, but every spreadsheet they handed me was fuel, and every signature I watched them scribble taught me how power works until I could write my own. I met Inez Corbin in a workshop on regulatory risk at a tech conference I almost didn't attend. She had this look, sharp eyes, pressed lips, like she'd already read your terms and rejected them. Over coffee, she told me about the firm that pushed her out after a decade of loyal work. They said I lacked vision, she said flatly. What they meant was I questioned theirs. I liked her immediately. By the end of that week, we'd sketched the skeleton of Dovetail Systems on a whiteboard in a hotel business center. She handled compliance architecture. I wrote the predictive logic. We both knew the industry's cracks because we'd lived in them, her in regulation, me in silence. The funding gauntlet was brutal. 28 rejections. The 29th came from a VC who leaned back and said, "Maybe if you brought in a male co-founder, we could revisit this." Inez broke her pen in half under the table. Then came Kellen Trask. Retired. Blunt. Former defense contractor with a mind wired for failure points. After our pitch, he nodded once and said, "You see what others don't? That's the kind of thinking that wins wars in contracts." He gave us $200,000 of his own money. No firm, no strings, just belief. I used the funds to build what I'd been quietly sketching for years, an ownership lattice no one could trace. Dovetail belonged to an LLC which was owned by a Delaware trust which was held in part by another corporate entity with 3 silent partners, 2 of which were me under separate legal identities. My name never appeared. Meanwhile, Linwood Holdings stumbled into the mess we'd predicted: bloated contracts, missed environmental deadlines, outdated tech systems they refused to update. Every article about their inefficiencies read like an old page from my blue folder. Inez and I kept building. Nights, weekends, week after week. We onboarded our first pilot client, a mid-sized developer in Arizona. Our system flagged an unfiled permit no one else had noticed. It saved them $1.6 million in penalties. We didn't advertise the win. We didn't need to. Word spread anyway. The Linwood family retreat was held every fall at the estate in Kennebunkport. A parade of curated traditions, boat rides, lawn games, matching sweaters embroidered with our initials. It was always marketed as a celebration of legacy, but in truth, it felt like an annual audit who had succeeded, who had slipped, and who was still irrelevant. I arrived late on purpose. Just enough to avoid the scripted welcomes, just early enough to make sure no one could claim I was rude. Most years, I kept my head down, played the part. But this time, something in the air felt brittle. I was refilling my coffee in the main kitchen when I heard my name. Not directly, just a muffled, "She's not part of this," from behind the pantry door. I froze. Inside, my father's voice, low and frayed. "Linwood Holdings has 28 days of liquidity. The Westview project is bleeding us out. If we don't close with Cloverstone, we're finished." I pressed my palm against the cold tile. Reese sounded panicked. "We're really going to sell majority control to a ghost firm. We don't even know who they are. They're offering a fair valuation and a full bailout," my father said, bitterness cutting through. "Frankly, we're not in a position to be choosy." I nearly dropped my cup. Cloverstone Capital wasn't a ghost. It was the third-tier holding I created 2 years ago for strategic acquisitions. It was mine. They were unknowingly preparing to sell the company that once refused to hear my voice directly to me. I slipped out of the kitchen before anyone saw me, walked down to the shoreline boots sinking into the damp sand. They had no idea. No idea who had structured the buyout, who had approved the term sheet, who had the final sign-off authority. They thought they were handing the keys to a stranger in a tailored suit. They were wrong. Back in my room, I called Inez and told her to pause negotiations. Temporarily. I needed time to think, to strategize. The part of me that still ached wanted to walk away and let it all burn. But the founder in me? She saw the opening. The conference room at Greystone Towers smelled like leather and power. I chose the corner chair beside the window, let the skyline fill my peripheral vision, and folded my hands. My lawyer, Porter Hale, stood by the door with the file. At 9:58 a.m., the Linwoods arrived. My father entered first, flanked by Reese and Callum, their movements sharp and restless. Aunt Zelda trailed behind in a cashmere coat and pearls like we were meeting for brunch. Elio strolled in, last smirking. They didn't see me at first. Not really. I was in a charcoal blazer, hair pulled back, no nameplate in front of me. Familiar invisibility. "Where's the CEO?" my father asked, glancing around. Porter cleared his throat. "She's already here." They turned. Elio squinted. "What's she doing here? Is this a scheduling mix-up? I didn't rise?" "No mix-up." My father frowned. "This is a high-level negotiation, Sabrina. We don't have time for—" I nodded to Porter. He opened the folder and laid it flat. "Sabrina Linwood," he began, "holds a 76% ownership stake in Cloverstone Capital. She is its principal decision-maker. In addition, she owns the patents related to the compliance technology your firm is seeking to license. The terms you've been reviewing are hers." Silence. No one moved. My father's face drained of color. Reese looked like he'd swallowed gravel. Callum leaned back, arms crossed, disbelief shifting into calculation. Then my father said, almost too softly to hear, "You sir built this?" I stood. "Yes," I said, while you were asking if my benefits package was decent. While Aunt Zelda was telling me to marry someone stable. While Elio was suggesting I aim lower to stay realistic. I was building this. Zelda laughed, once sharp and brittle. "You're bluffing." Porter tapped the final page. We brought the filings. I watched her expression collapse under the weight of proof. No one said a word as I sat back down, unhurried, my fingers brushing the edge of the contract they all needed me to sign. And in that hush, something shifted. Not in them. In me. The silence didn't last. Reese stood up so fast, his chair scraped against the floor. "So this was a setup," he snapped. "You've been waiting for this moment, haven't you? Waiting to humiliate us?" "No," I said calmly, though my pulse was hammering in my ears. "I've been waiting for you to need the thing you never believed I could build." Zelda scoffed. "Ungrateful. That's what this is. We gave you everything, and now you ambush us like some boardroom villain. You gave me dinner invitations and polite dismissal," I said. "You never once asked what I was working on. You never thought I could hold anything other than a planner." Callum leaned forward, arms on the table. "Why now? Why not come to us before it got to this?" "Because you never would have listened," I said. "You only hear people you've already decided are worthy." My father was silent, his fingers tracing the grain of the table like he needed something solid to anchor him. Reese paced. Zelda whispered to Elio like I wasn't in the room. Callum looked at the financial summary Porter had laid out, and I could see the gears turning. Always the pragmatist. I placed the contract in the center of the table. "This is a clean acquisition," I said. "Cloverstone offers $90 million. Your family retains 18% ownership. No controlling stake. Your legacy survives. The firm gets what it needs to stay alive." My voice didn't crack, but under the table my hands curled into fists to keep them from trembling. "You'll still have roles," I added, "if you're willing to adapt. But the structure changes. The technology leads now." No one spoke. I exhaled slowly, keeping my gaze level. This isn't revenge. It's architecture. I listened to every complaint, every missed target, every regulatory blind spot. I built the solution because no one else was going to build it for me. Callum finally broke the silence. "You're really not bluffing." "No," I said. And when I picked up the pen, I didn't hesitate. I signed first, then slid it across the table. Chapter 8, The Cost of Being Invisible, 370 words. The ceiling in my hotel room was textured with swirls of plaster that caught the light like a tide I couldn't name. I'd been staring at it for hours, still in my suit makeup, fading hair, tight enough to ache. My phone buzzed once on the nightstand. Porter. They signed, he said. All of them. Deal's binding. Congratulations. I thanked him, hung up, and let the silence fill the space. It should have felt like victory. The culmination of every late night, every dismissal I swallowed, whole every condescending smile I filed away. But all I could think about was the way my name hadn't been spoken at dinner tables for years, unless it was to ask if I was dating or to suggest I smile more. I'd built something that mattered. They needed it. They had acknowledged it, even if reluctantly. And yet, I remembered sitting at the kids' table well into my 20s. Remembered answering questions with one-sentence replies because I knew no one would follow up. I remembered the moment I stopped bringing anything to contribute ideas, stories, ambition, because invisibility had become safer than rejection. My therapist once asked me, would you trade this success to have just once been seen as you really were? I hadn't answered then. I didn't know how. Now lying in this room, signature ink still drying in another building across town, I thought maybe the answer was no. But not because I didn't long for recognition. I did. I still did. It was just that I no longer believed it would come in the form I used to crave. Respect, maybe, but not closeness. I sat up finally, pulling my hair loose, letting it fall over my shoulders like armor peeled away. My hands ached from the tension of holding the pen steady earlier. My voice had held. My resolve had not cracked. But the girl who sat at that dinner table years ago hadn't disappeared. She had just gone quiet, and in that quiet, she had learned how to build alone. Chapter 9. The Woman Who Walked In, 380 words. The new sign gleamed above the entrance in brushed steel Linwood Clover Systems, a name forged from salvage and survival, a name that bore mine finally. The lobby buzzed with quiet celebration, investors, partners, city officials. I stood behind the curtain, waiting to step onto the small stage we'd set up beside the main staircase. My heart wasn't racing. It was steady, slow, like it understood this wasn't a moment to fear. When I walked out, the crowd hushed. For the first time, they weren't just looking at me. They were seeing me. I spoke about the future, about resilience, recalibration, reinvention. I thanked the teams that worked through the merger. I acknowledged the company's past without glorifying it. I didn't name names. I didn't need to. In the second row, my father sat with his hands clasped tight in his lap. He didn't smile, but he didn't flinch either. He met my eyes once, nodded slightly, an offering of something I hadn't seen in years, quiet recognition. After the ceremony, I moved through the lobby, accepting congratulations, shaking hands. Most of the faces were familiar in that professional way, names tied to titles, not memories. Then I felt a light tap on my shoulder. It was Dane. The youngest of us, always more observer than player. He hadn't spoken much during the meetings, hadn't tried to interfere. But he had stayed, watched, listened. You were never the secretary, he said quietly. I turned to him. You were always the architect. It wasn't dramatic. There was no applause, no spotlight. Just those words offered plainly like they'd been waiting for the right moment to come out. I nodded, throat tightening. Thank you, I said. And my voice cracked in the smallest way. He didn't hug me, didn't linger, just gave a small smile and stepped away into the crowd. I stood alone for a moment, then looked back up at the sign. My name no longer hidden. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I had to hold the structure together by myself. The auditorium lights dimmed as my last slide faded into white. For a moment, the room was silent, not out of obligation, but reverence. I recognized the expressions in the front row. I'd worn those same ones a decade ago, shoulders drawn and eyes half lit with questions no one had ever answered honestly. Women who were told they were too quiet, too emotional, too inexperienced, or worse, too much. The Corbin Initiative had started with a single idea. Inez and I wanted to build something for women like us. Not just mentorship, infrastructure, legal templates, capital access, rooms where no one questioned their right to be there. I stepped away from the podium and looked at the faces in front of me, dozens of them, maybe more. Some had already launched ventures. Others were still drafting their first pitch. All of them builders in the dark. They didn't believe me, I said. Not when I spoke. Not when I presented. Not even when I asked to be included. I paused, letting the memory of that silence settle between us. So I signed my name to something they couldn't ignore. Behind me, the screen glowed with the final image, my grandmother's earrings, and a contract folder labeled executed. The room stayed quiet, but I saw heads nodding. Let them underestimate you, I said. That's where the leverage lives. Applause rose, not explosive, but layered. Gratitude, recognition, resolve. Afterward, a young woman approached me with her prototype, balanced carefully in both hands. She was shaking slightly. I didn't think people like us could get this far, she said. I smiled. That's the point. They don't see us coming. She laughed. A real one. And I knew she'd be fine. Inez found me near the catering table later holding 2 coffees. She handed me one wordlessly and looked toward the stage. You still get nervous? Always, I said. But you still go up. Always. I said again softer this time. That night in my apartment, I filed a grant approval for a young founder working out of her garage. No press release, no LinkedIn post. Just a quiet signature beneath hers in the margin where only she would see it.